You're sitting at the coffee shop, the one you always go to because they make decent coffee and the Wi-Fi works. Across from you is a couple, arguing in hushed tones. She says everything's fine. He nods, but you know they're both lying. Not because you overheard the conversation, but because the way she's gripping her cup, the exact angle he's looking at his phone instead of his eyes, the unnatural rhythm of their breathing, everything screams a truth they themselves haven't yet admitted. Welcome to the club of incomprehensible minds. Carl Jung was waiting for you. While everyone else is watching a couple drinking coffee, you're watching a 5-act psychological drama. And the worst part? You can't turn it off. It's like having a superpower no one asked for and that you can't give back. Jung spent decades studying minds like yours, and he discovered that you're not weird. You're simply tuned into frequencies that 99% of humanity doesn't even know exist. This video will tell you if you're part of that 1%, and I warn you, the 8th sign will make you reevaluate every single awkward conversation you've had in the last 10 years, because what you always thought was your social flaw is actually proof that your brain processes reality on a level most people don't even conceive of. If you're already nodding because someone finally describes exactly how your mind works, like now. Jung said that the encounter between two personalities is like the contact between two chemical substances. If there's a reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when your personality operates on 7 dimensions while others exist on just 1? You don't just hear the words. When someone tells you they had a good day, your brain is processing the tone of voice that betrays tiredness, the micro-expression of frustration lasting 0.3 seconds, the historical context of their last 15 conversations, the future implications of what they're keeping quiet, and the unconscious motivations that they themselves don't even know. Welcome to what Jung called multidimensional processing. While average person listens to the words as if they were a restaurant menu, you're reading the entire cuisine, the chef's story, and his conflicted relationship with his mother. It's exhausting. It's like watching a movie and simultaneously seeing the script, backstage footage, future reviews, and the cultural impact it will have 20 years from now. Jung discovered that these minds naturally access what he called the collective unconscious, that profound level of shared human experience that most people touch perhaps twice in their lives during a mystical experience or after eating questionable mushrooms. You live within it, constantly, drug-free, free. Practical example, you're watching a movie. Everyone else is enjoying the plot. You've already predicted the ending at minute 12, not because you're smart, but because you can sense the underlying mythical structure. You recognize the archetype of the hero, the traitor, the sacrifice. It's like watching The Matrix, but instead of code green, there are universal psychological patterns that have been repeating themselves since the dawn of time. Or maybe you finish people's sentences, and they look at you askance, thinking you're presumptuous, but you're not guessing. You're simply sensing the gravitational trajectory of their thoughts. Jung called it the transcendent function. Your brain's ability to bridge the conscious and unconscious mind in real time. Others need years of therapy to get to where you are after 30 seconds of conversation. Comment if you've ever known how someone's story ended before they finished telling it. Write, "I read between dimensions." The real problem? While others communicate on the surface level, you're simultaneously translating between 7 levels of reality. It's like trying to explain a 3-dimensional hologram to someone living in a 2-dimensional world. They only see flat shapes, you see depth, shadows, multiple perspectives, and when you try to explain it to them, they tell you you're complicating them. But are you the one complicating them, or is it they the one simplifying them to the point of absurdity?
Second sign, you're on the subway, crowded, rush hour. Someone next to you is listening to music so loud you can hear the beat through their cheap headphones. Across from you is a guy staring into space with a look you've seen 1,000 times. That look that says, "I'm thinking about what it would be like to jump." Not literally, but psychologically. To give up everything, to change your life, to disappear. And then there's that woman with a probably fake Prada bag, obsessively checking her phone every 3 seconds, as if waiting for a message that will never arrive, and you know it. Not because you're a clairvoyant, but because you recognize the pattern. The symbolic language of desperation disguised as normality. Jung called it symbolic consciousness, the ability to think in metaphors and symbols, not as a linguistic tool, but as a primary mode of mental processing. You don't just understand metaphors, you think in metaphors. For you, a simple conversation about someone's work automatically becomes an exploration of their relationship with authority, creativity, personal power, and probably even with their father. Jung spent years studying what he called active imagination, the ability to interact with symbols and images as living psychological realities. If you have this kind of consciousness, you do it constantly without even realizing it. Everything you see has 3 levels of meaning: the literal level that everyone sees, the symbolic level that few perceive, and the archetypal level that virtually no one touches. That's why you're drawn to complex, layered narratives that others find confusing. Films like Inception or Arrival don't seem complicated to you. They finally seem comprehensible because they speak your native language. Art and music speak directly to your soul in ways you can't rationally explain. Philosophical questions that others dismiss as pointless seem like the only questions worth asking. And mythology, symbolism, ancient wisdom, that stuff draws you like a magnet because finally someone is speaking your language. The problem? When you try to share these symbolic insights, others look at you as if you're speaking Aramaic. It's like being fluent in a dream language while everyone else only communicates in basic, literal language while awake. You say, "This situation reminds me of the myth of Sisyphus pushing the boulder." And they reply, "What the hell are you talking about? It's just a work project." Comment if you've ever tried to explain a feeling about something and been told you were too abstract. Right, I speak in symbols, not just words. Jung understood that this symbolic fluency isn't a communication problem. It's proof that your mind has access to deeper layers of meaning. But this creates even more devastating isolation, because it's not just that others don't understand what you're saying, it's that they don't even understand the language you're speaking it in. Third sign, and this is where people start to feel uncomfortable. You're at dinner with friends. Everyone's talking about how terrible that politician or criminal or person who did that horrible thing is. And you nod, but inside you, there's a question you can't ask out loud without sounding like a psychopath. Why did he do it? Not in a judgmental sense, in a genuinely curious sense. What psychological mechanisms led him there? What trauma? What cognitive distortion? What lack of psychic integration created that behavior? Jung called it shadow integration consciousness, and he discovered something that shook the psychology of his time. You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. Your mind naturally gravitates toward this process, while others are happy to label behaviors as simply good or bad. Your brain seeks to understand deeper patterns. You're not morbidly curious about darkness. You recognize it as essential to understanding the complete human psyche. Jung documented this extensively in his work with patients. To truly know yourself and others, you must recognize the full spectrum of human potential, light and dark, angel and demon, not as oppositions, but as complements.
This explains why you're drawn to complex, morally ambiguous characters and stories. While everyone else is rooting for the perfect hero, you find the villain with understandable motivations compelling. True crime isn't about shock value, but about psychological insight. You want to understand, not judge. Explore taboo topics that others avoid like the plague. Understand instead of simply condemn harmful behavior. You can call this psychological wholeness, the integration of the light and shadow aspects of the personality. While most people operate in a psychological split, good versus bad, right versus wrong, your mind is moved beyond these simplistic categories. You've understood that we all contain everything, the capacity for cruelty and compassion, for selfishness and sacrifice, and that denying one part means not truly knowing any part. The challenge? This fascination with the shadow makes others deeply uncomfortable. They're still operating from what Jung called persona identification, completely identified with their socially acceptable mask, while projecting their shadow onto others. You've integrated, they've repressed, and this frightens them because you represent what they refuse to see in themselves. Comment if you've ever been called obscure for asking questions others don't ask, right? I'm not obscure, I'm complete. But Jung discovered that this integration of the shadow leads to the most isolating aspect of your rare consciousness. Because once you've seen the shadow and integrated it, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer participate in social plays where everyone pretends to be only light. And that makes you an alien among humans. Fourth sign. It's Saturday night. All your peers are out having fun, bars, parties, clubs, and you're at home with a book on existential philosophy and a strange feeling in your chest. It's not depression. It's not social anxiety. It's something deeper and stranger. It's like nostalgia for a place you've never been, as if a part of you belongs to a dimension that doesn't exist in ordinary reality. Jung called it existential nostalgia. And he identified that people with rare consciousness feel homesick for a place that doesn't exist in ordinary reality, a realm where depth, meaning, and authentic connection are the norm rather than the exception. It's not romantic melancholy, it's a genuine psychological hunger for a level of existence that others can't even conceive of. Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon in his concept of individuation. If you possess this rare awareness, you're naturally oriented toward the big questions. Why are we here? What is the meaning of existence? How do we reconcile beauty and suffering? And not in a superficial way, like a cocktail hour conversation, but in a visceral way, like a 3 a.m. existential crisis. But here's the profound challenge Jung documented. While others are content with what he called collective adaptation, fitting into social roles and expectations, your psyche demands authentic self-realization. You're not satisfied with superficial answers because your mind demands genuine understanding. And this creates a unique form of loneliness that Jung called psychological isolation. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like the only member of your species on the planet. It's not social loneliness. It's the loneliness of existing in a different dimension of consciousness, like being the only human on a planet of robots. They function perfectly. You exist, and existence is infinitely more complicated than functioning. Jung discovered that individuals with this orientation often feel like they're living in exile from their true home. You seek meaning in experiences others take for granted. You question assumptions everyone accepts without thinking. And you feel more understood by books, art, and music than by people, because those creative expressions come from souls who have touched the same existential dimension you inhabit daily.
This existential nostalgia isn't depression. It's proof that your consciousness has expanded beyond conventional boundaries. Jung called these individuals cultural creatives, people whose psychological development anticipates the next stage of human evolution. You are a psychological pioneer, living in an era that hasn't yet caught up with you. The isolation intensifies because when you try to share these existential insights, Others often respond with discomfort or attempts to redirect you to more practical matters. They tell you, "You're thinking too much," as if deep thought were a disease to be cured rather than the natural function of an alert mind. But Jung understood something crucial about this nostalgia. It's not the symptom of a problem. It's the symptom of a solution. Proof that your psyche is moving towards something greater than social survival, toward what he called the self with a capital S, the total integration of the conscious and the unconscious. Fifth sign. You're at the supermarket, in line at the checkout. The person in front of you is arguing over the price of a box of cookies in an overly aggressive tone. Everyone else in line is huffing and puffing in annoyance. You, on the other hand, are engaging in real-time psychological archaeology. You see that anger isn't about the cookies. You see the defense mechanism, probably displacement. Anger pent up from somewhere else in their life is exploding on the poor teenage cashier who earns €8 an hour. You also see the wound, probably related to control. Perhaps he grew up in a family where everything was unpredictable and now needs to control every detail, even absurd ones like the price of cookies. And you see the authentic self beneath it all. A scared and tired person who is using the armor of anger because it's all he knows. Jung called this psychological archaeology, the ability to dig beneath superficial behaviors to uncover the layers of psychological meaning buried beneath. If you have this kind of mind, you do it automatically, constantly, with everyone. You can't turn it off, even if you wanted to. It's like having a psychological CT scan always on. While others accept social interactions at face value, your mind is processing micro-expressions that contradict spoken words, body language that reveal emotional states, vocal tones that betray internal conflicts, behavioral patterns that indicate unconscious motivations. And the worst part, you often understand people better than they understand themselves. Jung discovered that this perceptive ability stems from what he called intuitive perception, the mind's ability to read the psychological field around individuals. You're not just seeing the person, you're perceiving their entire psychological ecosystem, their defenses, their wounds, their fears, their repressed desires, all simultaneously. This archaeological awareness explains why people confide in you even when you don't invite them. They unconsciously sense that you see, that you understand, that you don't judge but comprehend. And this is both a gift and a curse, because it means you absorb the psychological confessions of strangers while you're just trying to buy milk. It also explains why you feel exhausted by superficial social situations. Your brain is working at full capacity to process all this data, while others are simply chatting about the weather. You prefer authentic and vulnerable conversations to small talk because at least those respect the level at which your mind naturally operates. And sometimes you know more about someone's inner state than they do. You see their blind spots, their self-sabotage patterns, the lies they tell themselves. And you can't say anything. Because if you do, they'll look at you like you're an alien or a psychic stalker. Comment if you ever felt burdened by seeing what others don't. Right? I see the person beneath the mask. Jung understood that this archaeological awareness isn't a burden. It's a gift that allows you to serve as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious worlds. But it leads to an even more complex aspect of your rare mind. Because once you see through everyone's psychological defenses, you no longer can participate in social theater. And this makes you invisible, even when you are the only person who truly sees. Sixth sign. And this is where your mind becomes truly incomprehensible to others. You're in an argument. Someone says, you have to be either A or B. You're either with us or against us, black or white, right or wrong. And you're there in the middle, thinking, but why can't it be both? Why can't it be A and B simultaneously? Why should reality conform to these artificial binary categories that humans have invented to feel more secure? Jung called it paradoxical thinking.
And he discovered that psychologically mature individuals possess the ability to simultaneously hold seemingly contradictory truths without needing to resolve them into simple categories. This is what I call both-and consciousness, and it represents a fundamental shift from the either-or thinking that dominates ordinary mental processing.
If you possess this rare mind, you don't just tolerate paradox, you recognize it as closer to the true nature of reality. Jung built his entire psychological system on paradoxes. The more conscious you become, the more you realize you know nothing. Strength often emerges from accepting vulnerability. Individuation requires both self-focus and connection with others. Healing happens through embracing rather than rejecting your wounds. But here's what makes this truly alien to most people. While others need clear categories and simple answers, your mind naturally recognizes that life's most important truths exist in the tension between opposites. You understand that people can be simultaneously selfish and altruistic. Behaviors can be both harmful and protective. Emotions can contain multiple contradictory elements. Truth often emerges from the collision of opposing perspectives. Jung called this function transcendent, the psyche's ability to unite opposing forces in a superior synthesis. Your rare mind operates naturally from this transcendent perspective, while others remain stuck in binary thinking. And this creates massive communication problems. When you express nuanced, paradoxical insights, others respond with frustration or requests to choose sides. They operate from what Jung called direct thinking, linear, logical, socially adapted. You access non-directed thinking, associative, symbolic, paradoxical. They are two entirely different languages. The challenge intensifies because paradoxical awareness allows you to see through the false simplifications that others cling to. You recognize that most political positions contain partial truths and blind spots. Psychological health requires integrating rather than eliminating negative traits. Wisdom often sounds like a contradiction to those seeking simple answers. The deepest truths cannot be captured in orderly philosophical systems. Comment if you've ever been told you're hesitant to see multiple sides. Write, I think in spectrums, not absolutes. Jung understood that paradoxical thinking isn't intellectual confusion. It's evidence of psychological sophistication. But this sophistication leads to one of the most challenging aspects of your rare consciousness. Because when you live in paradox, you can no longer give people the comfort of absolute certainties. And this makes you uncomfortable to be around. Seventh sign, and this is where it gets really weird. Have you noticed that when you walk into a room, something changes? Not in a selfish sense, in an objective sense. People react to you in extreme ways. Either they're immediately drawn to you as if they've known you forever, or they become strangely defensive for no apparent reason. Casual conversations somehow turn into profound explorations. People you barely knew confide in you secrets they've never told anyone. Jung made a shocking discovery about this. When you begin the psychological journey toward wholeness, your mere presence activates dormant potentials in others, whether they like it or not. He called it catalytic consciousness, and it stems from his insight into what he called the self-archetype in others, their deepest potential for psychological wholeness. But most people's egos are terrified of this transformational energy because it threatens their familiar identity structures.
This catalytic effect explains many of your confusing social experiences. Why some people are immediately drawn to your energy, why others feel threatened by your questions and insights, why casual relationships often become unexpectedly intense, why you seem to bring out both the best and the worst in people. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. You're not trying to change anyone.
You're simply being authentic to your individuated consciousness. Transformational reactions happen because your psychological wholeness naturally invites others to confront their own fragmentation. You're a mirror, and many people hate what they see reflected back at them. Jung called individuals with this catalytic consciousness wounded healers, people who have transformed their own psychological wounds into wisdom that can facilitate healing in others. You have become what Jung called a cultural creative, someone whose consciousness anticipates the next stage of human psychological evolution. Comment if people often tell you that meeting you changed their lives. Write, "I only reflect their potential." The challenge is that this transformational energy operates whether you want it to or not. You can't turn off your individuation. It radiates through your presence, your questions, your way of seeing the world. And this can be lonely because many people prefer to stay away from catalysts. It's safer to remain dormant than to awaken. Eighth sign, and this is the most profound. You're not interested in personal growth as a hobby. You don't read psychology books as a pastime. You don't do therapy because it's trendy. You feel a magnetic pull toward what Jung called individuation. And it's not optional. It's a fundamental psychological imperative, like breathing. Jung defined individuation as the process through which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible, or complete unity. But for minds like yours, this isn't optional self-improvement, it's an existential necessity. This is what I call evolutionary consciousness, and it represents the psyche's natural drive toward wholeness, authenticity, and psychological integration. If you have this rare mind, you don't choose transformation, you are called to it by something deeper than conscious will. It's as if your soul has a plan, and you are merely the vehicle through which it manifests. Jung discovered that individuating consciousness creates unmistakable patterns. You are repeatedly drawn to experiences that challenge your fundamental assumptions. Periods of crisis often precede your greatest breakthroughs. You feel restless when life becomes too comfortable or predictable. You naturally seek mentors, teachings, and experiences that facilitate growth. You understand that psychological death and rebirth are necessary for authentic development. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Jung discovered that individuating minds don't just transform themselves. They become agents of collective transformation. Your psychological evolution contributes to what he called the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of human psychological development. You're not just healing yourself, you're healing something in the collective human psyche. This evolutionary drive explains why you feel compelled to understand yourself on the deepest levels. You're willing to confront psychological material that others avoid. You recognize patterns and cycles in your development. You trust the transformational process even when it's painful. You feel a responsibility to become your most authentic self. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely." Your rare mind doesn't just understand this intellectually, you feel it as a sacred responsibility to yourself and to the collective human psyche. It's not narcissism, it's the opposite. It's recognizing that your becoming whole allows others to do the same.
The profound challenge is that this drive to individuate can feel overwhelmingly lonely. You're becoming something that doesn't yet exist in ordinary consciousness. You're pioneering psychological territories that others can't even imagine. But Jung discovered something beautiful about this solitude. Individuating consciousness eventually transcends the need for external validation. You begin to find profound companionship with your authentic self, the integrated totality of your conscious and unconscious potentials. You no longer need others to understand because you understand, and that's enough. Comment if you recognize yourself as someone called to become who you truly are. Write, "I choose conscious evolution." So, there they are, the 8 unmistakable signs that your mind operates on a frequency that 99% of people simply can't understand. If you recognized yourself in these patterns, remember what I said at the beginning. Your mind is processing information in ways that most people literally can't comprehend. But now you understand why. You're not broken, difficult, or strange. You are what Carl Jung called individuated consciousness, someone whose psychological development represents the next stage of human evolution. Your ability to think in dimensional layers, speak the language of symbols, integrate shadow aspects, experience existential nostalgia, read psychological archaeology, embrace paradoxical thinking, catalyze transformation in others, and surrender to the process of individuation. These are not problems to be solved, they are gifts to be honored. Jung discovered that minds like yours serve a crucial function in human psychological evolution. You are bridging the gap between the conscious and unconscious worlds. If this video made you feel finally understood, leave a like. Let me know in the comments which of the 8 signs struck you the most. And subscribe to the channel if you want to explore Jungian psychology that explains why you're the way you are instead of telling you need to change. I hope you stop apologizing for how you think and find someone who speaks your symbolic language. See you in the next video. And remember, you're not too complicated. Others are too simple.